The meeting to order, and the meeting is now being recorded for the purpose of transparency and for permanent public access on CB2's YouTube archive. Please keep your microphone muted when you're not speaking and your cameras on, especially if you are given the floor to speak. I will let you know when topics are open for comment by committee members, board members at large, and then the general public. If attendees experience technical difficulties with the Webex feature, you may go online at help.webex.com or reach out to the district office. We provide access for all of our neighbors, regardless of physical ability or limitation. And Carol Ann, have we any accommodations this meeting?
None were requested.
Okay, thank you. And we will now begin roll call. I am Juliet Cullen Chung, Chair of the Transportation and Public Safety Committee, and Mr. Secretary.
Cheryl Gelbs. I don't see her on this. I'm John Quint, Secretary. Ernie Augustus. I don't see him. Sandy Balboza. I don't see her. John Dew.
I'm here.
Doreen Gallo. I don't see her. Brian Howell.
I'm here, John.
Patrick Kalaki.
I'm here in Brooklyn Heights near Ken Fisher.
Sid Meyer and Carol in Bourneville.
I'm present.
Ciro Scala in North Heights.
Yes, I'm here.
Carol and Todd.
I'm here.
Okay, we have a quorum.
Thank you, John. And before we get into our agenda and our committee discussion, I just wanted to recognize that I'm very pleased that Mr. Sid Meyer is going to be the new committee chair moving forward. So thank you, Sid.
Thank you.
Yeah. Can I have an approval of the agenda, please?
So moved.
Second.
John Dew.
Thank you. We are pleased to have the Center for Court Innovation here tonight. Speaking with us will be Jonathan Montsalve, the director, and Amanda Berman, the project director for the Red Hook Community Justice Center. So we'll hand it off to you.
Hey, thank you. Thank you, Juliet. Thank you so much for having us. Good evening, everyone. As Juliet just shared, my name is Amanda Berman, and I'm going to be speaking for a few minutes today with my colleague, John Monsalve, and we both work for the Center for Court Innovation. My role is overseeing the Red Hook Community Justice Center, as well as some of our work around driver accountability that I'm going to touch very briefly on. And then John's going to share a little bit about his role overseeing another project of ours called Brooklyn Justice Initiatives. So if you're not familiar with the Center for Court Innovation, I'll just share briefly a little bit of background. We are a nonprofit, rapidly growing in real time, that works in the justice reform space. We're based here in New York City, but we also do some work nationally, internationally. But essentially, we work to create a fair and effective and humane justice system. And we do this through three large buckets of work. One is that we implement programs to test out new ideas and solve problems right on the ground. And that's where John and I largely fit in. And we also have a bucket of work that includes research, where we're looking into what works, what doesn't, and we're evaluating our own programs, as well as synthesizing data that we can get access to around justice reform issues. And then lastly, we also provide a lot of expert assistance or consulting to jurisdictions around the country and around the world who are also interested in implementing justice reform efforts. So my role in overseeing the Red Hook Community Justice Center, which is one of our operating programs, is very multifaceted. And at the Justice Center, we are a community court, and that means that we take a community focused and problem-solving approach to justice. We are really seeking to reduce the harms that the justice system has historically caused in the communities that are most impacted, and also at the same time trying to really increase access to justice, opportunities and resources, and elevate the voice of the communities who are most impacted by the system. So many of you are probably thinking, why is she here talking about Red Red Hook. That's in CB6, not in CB2. Why should we care what's going on over there? And the reason is because, well, first of all, although we focus primarily on Red Hook and the surrounding areas, we do also serve people who come from all areas of Brooklyn and even other parts of New York City, because we do function as both a courthouse and a community center. So we are providing services as a way of people to resolve their cases, but also anyone can walk through our doors and access all of our programming and services regardless of where they are coming from. But most importantly, the reason that I'm touching a little bit on our work in Red Hook is that we really function as a testing ground, as a kind of pilot site or laboratory where we try to develop new and innovative approaches to community problems. And the idea is that once we can prove on a smaller scale that they appear to work, then we can lay the foundation to replicate them or bring them to scale. And in fact, that is what ultimately led to the growth of the project John's going to talk about, Brooklyn Justice Initiatives, but it also has led to reform efforts that have become really very relevant today, and I know are topics that you all are actively discussing from what we've been told. So that includes reform movements around new legislation like bail reform, around the closure of Rikers, around decriminalization of certain types of offenses. And so I want to just touch briefly on a few different examples of how the work that we've done on the ground and at this smaller kind of laboratory scale, how that has translated into or could translate into opportunities for broader reform. So one program that we run at the Red Hook Community Justice Center is called Peacemaking. And I wanted to talk about this as an example of what community-led solutions can look like when we're in this era of calls for police reform, calls for defunding the police, talks about how do we build community capacity to respond to conflict, to respond to problems, rather than always relying on traditional forms of law enforcement. So the peacemaking program is premised on the idea that those who are closest to the problem and closest to a conflict are also closest to the solution. And so what that means is that when there's conflict in the community, no one has a greater stake in getting that conflict addressed or preventing it from escalating or repairing the harm that was caused. No one has a greater stake than those who are part of the conflict and the surrounding community. And so peacemaking allows for community members to solve problems without using the court system necessarily, or it may be that the court system gets a criminal court case and then brings it back to the community and turns it over to them to try to resolve. We train community members to become what we call volunteer peacemakers. And those peacemakers are facilitating what we call circles, restorative justice dialogues that typically take place in a circle. We did not develop this intervention. We did not develop this model. This is something that we learned from mentors in the Native American community. It's also common in many indigenous practices around the world. But the idea is that instead of calling upon institutions of power and separating people from their community when there's harm caused, there is an alternative approach. And that approach is allow them to come back together with the community, allow them to be held accountable by those whom they have harmed, and allow the community members and the person who's harmed to really drive the conversation about what needs to be done moving forward. And so instead of saying you have caused a harm and we're going to arrest you and take you away from your community and put you in jail, instead it's how can we reflect on what led to this harm, who should be held accountable, and how can they repair that harm moving forward. So that is just one example of how communities can play a more prominent role, the most critical role in responding to issues without always having to rely on policing or the court system. And so, it may sound slightly ironic to say that, we are trying to get people to not rely on us when we are in fact part of the court system. But what we are actively trying to do is essentially put ourselves out of business so that we do not have to occupy that footprint and cause the harm that historically the justice system has caused in so many of the communities that we serve. Rather, we're trying to empower the communities with the resources, with the capacity, and with the power to address issues without having to rely on some of these systems that have been historically oppressive. So that's one example I wanted to share. One more I want to touch on briefly, and then I'm going to pass it to John, is our work around driver accountability. And I wanted to mention this in particular because I know this is the Transportation and Public Safety Committee, but I also know that you're focused right now more on issues around justice reform and public safety. But we have, over the last few years, we have kind of taken on a more prominent role in the issue of street safety and driver accountability. And that grew out of a very, very small pilot program we started in 2015 that was aimed at trying to find a better solution for these low-level vehicular offenses that were coming through the criminal courts. And people would usually get a fine or maybe a short jail sentence. And in either event, it didn't feel it was equitable, and it didn't feel like it was actually changing behavior. And so what we did was we developed a brief intervention, about 90 minutes long, that focused on raising drivers' awareness of their risky driving behaviors on the roads, and then working with them to identify how they could change those behaviors and hopefully make for safer streets. And that was piloted about 6 years ago. And since then, based on the success at our small site in Red Hook, we were ultimately able to secure funding through City Council to expand borough-wide and then ultimately citywide. We're also now expanding into addressing more serious vehicular crimes where people have actually been struck and killed. And I think it's another example of just how, it's important to be thinking about issues of equity. It is important for us to be thinking about how do we know if something works? Sometimes starting small and scaling up is the best way to know. And I'm happy to talk a little bit more about any of this if you have questions when we get to that, but I want to pass it to John so he can talk about the work that he's doing at BJI.
Thank you, Amanda, and hi, everyone. We really appreciate the invite today and for having us. I'm gonna build off what Amanda mentioned, but I just want to provide some clarity here on the Center for Court Innovation as our parent organization. I am the project director at Brooklyn Justice Initiatives, which exists within the criminal courthouse on Schermerhorn Street. We launched Brooklyn Justice Initiatives about 8 years ago now, and it was a pretty simple idea back then. To bring some of the tenets of the community court, some of the stuff that Amanda has mentioned, to the centralized courthouse. We knew that starting small made sense, and there was some opportunity in Red Hook for some of the initiatives that we were trying to get off the ground. But we also understood that there was a lot of work that could be done borough-wide. And so the Center for Court Innovation partnered with the Office of Court Administration to open up a small office and to try to provide some alternative to incarceration and some alternatives to bail within the criminal courthouse. We've since expanded significantly. Today, we have offices inside the criminal courthouse, at the Supreme Courthouse as well, on 25 Willoughby Street in downtown Brooklyn, and on 14 DeKalb Street in downtown Brooklyn as well, are our community offices. And so today we have about a staff of 100 that provide different alternative to incarceration services and alternative to bail in Brooklyn. For those of you that may not know, arraignments is open 9 a.m. to 1 a.m. 7 days a week. And that means that our court staff is there staffing the arraignment court part to provide what the city is calling the supervised release program. And so if you're not familiar, it's a pretty innovative program. The idea is, instead of having a law enforcement officer provide services to someone who was released without paying bail, rather kind of released under community supervision, the idea is that they would work with a social worker, a case manager, a mental health counselor to make sure that they return to court. We launched this program back in 2016. We had immense amount of success. We provided services to slightly over 8,000 people. That's 8,000 people that did not have to go to Rikers Island. And in 2019, as you may have heard, New York State Legislature passed the bail reform legislation, which impacted us in 2020. And so in January 2020, we went overnight really from only taking misdemeanors and nonviolent felonies to having every single charge essentially be eligible for diversion services in this bail program. And so today, it's at the discretion of the judge if they assign someone to work with us to make sure that they come back to their court date. What we try to do in the interim of those court dates is provide supportive services to address any individual need that the person may have. But it's important to remember that bail was designed to ensure that someone comes back to court. And so therefore, we're not necessarily mandating that someone go to services. We're trying to provide those supportive services in whatever community that they're in here in Brooklyn to make sure that they can continue those services after their court cases has been disposed of. To date, here in Brooklyn alone, about 10,000 folks have taken advantage of this service. And again, to put that into context, that's 10,000 folks that did not have to go to Rikers Island because of the services that we provide. We also are the service provider in the Brooklyn Young Adult Court Part. So today, all 18 to 24-year-olds who are arrested on a misdemeanor charge will come through a specialized court part. And the best way to think about those cases are, instead of receiving jail time or a fine, the young adults are receiving hours of service that's proportional to their crime with us. And so what we'll be doing at that point is providing a service that addresses some need that they may have. It is both a participant-driven process, but we also use a needs-based assessment to try to prescribe or figure out what that service can look like. If you're trying to think through what that might look like, it can be a host of different things: job placement or job readiness programming, mental health counseling, substance use education or counseling. We also are providing art-based interventions, employment support to individuals, which I mentioned before as well. And so the idea here is to have it be a participant-driven process, but also working with that case manager or social worker to make sure that we're filling in the gaps that someone may have. Someone may come to us for a simple trespassing charge and may have very severe, to use an example here, a very severe and persistent mental health issue. Our role isn't to necessarily figure out or cure, which we've heard a lot before, that mental health issue. We understand that that's something that a person may live with. But our goal is to really meet the individual where they're at, try to provide them supportive services in their community so that they can dispose of the court case. Those are really our two biggest programming areas. We have a couple more, which I'll name just in the spirit of kind of giving you the scope of the alternatives that we provide here in Brooklyn and in the community. We have a felony alternative to incarceration court part. So unindicted felony cases at the discretion of the Kings County District Attorney's Office can be referred to us for services. And so instead of it being a short mandate like it is for the youth, those mandates could be as long as a year of services with Brooklyn Justice Initiatives and in the community to dispose of their criminal court case. And recently, we've been running a precinct diversion program. Formerly, it was under the name Project Reset, which you may be familiar with, for DATs, desk appearance tickets, essentially allowing folks to work with us in lieu of having to show up to court or even set foot in a courthouse. Unfortunately, we lost funding for that program, but have been doing some work unfunded and are working right now to secure funding in the upcoming fiscal year for that program. But we are committed to providing what we call early diversion and precinct diversion services for folks. I want to pause and we get to the Q&A, but to bring back the Center for Court Innovation into the fold, a lot of the work happening here in Brooklyn, whether it's at the Red Hook Community Justice Center or at Brooklyn Justice Initiatives, is incredibly innovative. Part of what the Center for Court Innovation does is bring practitioners from across the country and around the world to learn a little bit more about what we do. And we often host site visits. These days we do it virtually, but site visits are delegations from all over who are looking to learn kind of the different community approaches that Amanda has talked about and the different court alternatives that I've touched on. And so we wanted to also name that, just having Brooklet as a hotbed of activity and ideas on how to be responsive to issues that we really have been dealing with for a long time. We've seen them well received and replicated around the world, and that's always encouraging for us to see as well. So I'm going to pause. Again, I think we've said a mouthful, and we want to make sure that we leave some time for some questions as well. So Juliet, I'm not sure if we kick it to you or you just open up the floor. But yeah, we'd like to just move into the next phase of the Q&A, if that's okay with everybody.
Yes, I would be happy to open up the floor. I just want to ask Taya if there's anything that you can do to get Cheryl Gelbs into the meeting. She's trying to get in.
Yep, I just saw your note. I'm reaching out to her.
Okay, great. Thank you, Jonathan and Amanda. It is so dense. You guys do so much. And I know there are lots more services that you haven't even touched on. So, but I would like to open it up to the committee to be able to ask you questions. So committee members, feel free to ask questions.
Jonathan and Amanda, this is John. I'm calling in reference to a portion of Community District 2 that is problematic for us, and it is the Fort Greene Public Housing Projects. You may or may not be aware that there have been several shootings in the public housing projects just in this year. 3 or 4 young teenagers have been shot to death. Others have been shot. I'm just talking about the ones that died as a result of that. The captain of the precinct is asking around, and he's asked us if there's any opportunity to engage the gang members. So my initial thought when I heard your program is, do you have anything along the lines of a Scared Straight program that we could get the teenagers to get involved in, that would redirect their energy from this gang activity?
So I'm happy to start. I would say we don't have that kind of model. We do offer a lot of different services that can, help young people or, older adults get access to the resources they need, whether it's employment or education, right, or mental health counseling, trauma counseling, and things of that nature. I wanted to mention you may be familiar with one of the anti-gun violence programs that the city funds. It's a model called Cure Violence. And basically it tries to take this public health approach to gun violence, and it seeks to interrupt the cycle of gun violence by giving people an opportunity who are from the community, who they typically refer to as credible messengers, to get a job as what they call violence interrupters and outreach workers. And their job is basically to have their ear to the ground, and when there's conflict, trying to get involved so that they can stem that cycle of violence and prevent it from escalating again. And I know that there is a Cure Violence program that serves Fort Greene. I'm pretty certain GMAC, it's called Gangsters Making Astronomical Changes.
Yes, they're on Myrtle Avenue. Yes, I'm very familiar with them.
Okay, so they're all the members of that group are all people who had previously been justice system involved or involved in that life, and have now, committed their lives to trying to connect people, not only to interrupt the violence, but also connect people with those kinds of resources as well. So have you all had any interactions with them?
Yeah, they're actually on Myrtle Avenue, a couple of blocks from the Fort Greene Public Housing.
Yeah.
The issue that we have with the GMAC folk is that they are much older and don't have that connection with the gang age teenagers. These GMAC, and they're mostly gentlemen, and they're very well spoken, and they know their business. They go all around the city, but particularly Brooklyn, and they do a very good job. I've gone to several of their, I want to say, wakes, which they have for the community after someone is killed, and they do a very good job. They do a very good job, but the teenagers that we're looking to reach are not there. And so the challenge has been, how do we connect and develop a relationship that allows us to bring these teenagers out of that environment and into a better environment? And I mentioned the Scared Straight because that's what I'm familiar with.
Yeah.
I don't know anything else but that could be used to scare the teenagers. I like your idea of offering them jobs and other kinds of avenues that they can have. Because the captain of the precinct said something to me that just stuck with me. He said, a lot of these kids don't see themselves living past the age of 25.
Yeah.
And how do you change that mentality? How do you get them out of that whole poverty component, which is what they've experienced their entire life?
Yeah, John, I'll let you chime in. I have other thoughts. This is such a big issue and there's so much to say, but John, go ahead.
No, absolutely. And I think, John, what Amanda just described is what we try to do on what we would call the preventative or the proactive side is, bringing that mental health, that cure violence approach into the community, trying to be proactive. Unfortunately, for our project here at Brooklyn Justice Initiatives, we are a little bit on the reactive side. The person would only be referred to us after they would have been charged.
Right.
And so, we do try to help around employment issues. We do provide intensive community supervision, upwards of meeting with folks 2 times a week, and making sure that we're addressing their needs. But that, John, I don't think it's responsive to your question because it's on the reactive side of the reality that you're describing. And so, Amanda, I don't know if you have other thoughts. We've got a couple of other cure violence program models. I'm not as familiar with GMAC, but I do understand that there's a lot of outreach and investment in youth and trying to provide activities that in the community, whether it's at the public housing units or whether it's in the community elsewhere, to just engage the youth in a different way and educate them about the realities of the gun violence. But as you said, it sometimes can be because of lack of access to resources and from a proactive side, that can be tough to address.
So Carolyn and Taylor,
I'm sorry.
I have your contact information. I will certainly be reaching out to you and see if we can coordinate something else that might be helpful and beneficial to that community specifically. Thank you.
Yeah, John, I also want to highlight for you what I just put in the chat is a link to a report that was recently released by our organization, by CCI, that was based on basically research around why young people 16 to 24 in New York City, those who are carrying guns, why do they carry guns? And this was using a participatory action research model. So if you're not familiar, for folks who don't know that kind of model, it's basically that they hired people from the community who knew other people who were carrying guns and engaged in gun violence, and the young people from the community, they were like an active part of leading this research project that was, interviews with people who, without sharing or disclosing any of their identities, right, talked about like what it is that leads them to engage in gun violence and carry guns. And not surprisingly, it touches on a lot of what we already know, right? It's trauma, it's this cycle of violence, it's having been exposed to violence. And I think what we know is like the scared straight model doesn't necessarily work, in part because it's really has to be about like how to invest, in these strategies like outside of what we typically see, the job creation, addressing trauma, getting people who connect with them, who can relate to them, but not talking down to them, because I think what you pointed out is exactly what we hear from young people all the time in Red Hook. And right now in Red Hook, there's a huge issue of gun violence. And what we're hearing from young people is, yes, like there are well-meaning people who are older than them that can say, I was in your shoes, I had that life, I know. But it's talking down to them, and they're not, they feel like they're being talked at and by people who can't relate to them. Maybe you lived in my shoes 20 years ago, but it's a different world now, right? And so I think who the messengers are matter a lot. And then also just trying to address these issues of trauma and violence, and all of that does intersect with poverty and systemic racism. And I cannot solve that problem in the next 3 minutes, but I'm happy to continue these conversations. But give that report a read. I think you might find it to be insightful.
I will do that. And I will send you the new way that they feud which is via YouTube. They actually the gangs feud with each other. I found this out from the captain of the 88th precinct, and I was able to get 1 or 2 of the videos. So I'll share them with you, and just as a way of understanding more how we might need to communicate them with them, because I thought maybe we could just take this methodology and get them to do the other thing that they see on YouTube a lot, which is compete with each other for dancing or basketball or
Yeah.
something else that allows them to expend that energy and get to know each other on a different level. So thank you for that. This was very helpful for me.
Good.
Juliet, I've taken enough time. Thank you.
Thank you, John. I think you brought up the number one issue, well, the number one related issue in our community, which is gun violence and gang violence. So that, that I think is really important to understand, what you guys do in that field and what is possible too. You brought up the peacemaking program, and when you described your programs, it was hard for me to really picture who was being addressed and served in these programs. In the peacemaking program, I imagine young, maybe gang affiliated members of the community going through that peacemaking program. But it sounds like maybe that's not the target. Maybe you could speak to a little bit more about, who the target is for that.
Yeah, so it is a good question. So, the program as it stands now tends to focus a lot on family conflict, neighbors who are in conflict, and not as much of the gang related issues, partly because that's not what comes through our court in Red Hook, but also, partly because I think it's just more complex. I think we have gotten involved in some of the more serious cases on juvenile. We tend to get more serious referrals for juvenile cases, but even those, I would say some do have gang undertones or affiliations, but it's not, we're not necessarily bringing together, right, people who are in two rival groups into a room of peacemaking. I think that there is potential for that, absolutely. I think it has to be connected to something that takes an approach like, the cure violence model, where you have people who are really trained and understand like how to de-escalate, how to relate to someone who, we have peacemakers from all walks of life. We have peacemakers who are teachers, who are nuns, who were former gang members, who are teenagers, who were trained in school. So it runs the full gamut. And so, I think it's about, we've talked about like, who are we training and recruiting as peacemakers, and that will inform in some ways who we can serve, because our peacemakers are sort of like our version of the credible messenger.
It's good to hear that you are including young people in the peacemaking program, because I think John is right that there's definitely the lack of connection, and you're trying to decouple the institutionalization of the authority, sort of like imposing these structures, and the nuns, the teachers, they're still the authorities. So so the peers are
exactly. Although, but it's interesting when they're in the context of a peacemaker, right? They're wearing a very different hat. And so the beauty of the peacemaking model is that everyone is on level ground, right? You don't talk unless you get the talking piece, and it has to pass around the whole circle. And so there's no talking at people, there's no cutting people off, there's no holding power. The power has to be equitably distributed in the circle. And so it is a very particular kind of model that, I think allows for a lot of young people who are in situations like this, who feel completely disempowered, it allows them to feel like they finally have voice. So it is really effective with young people, we find.
That sounds great. Other committee member comments or questions?
Hi. Yes. Jonathan, you touched on bail reform, and I wondered what kinds of general trends. I mean, it sounds like you were working to do things without bail and allow people to kind of be community supervised. I can't remember the term for a while, but what kinds of trends have you seen since the bail law changed last year, and what do you expect with some of those laws changing again, both in Brooklyn and across the state?
Thank you. That's a really good question. I'm going to thread in. Oh, there you go. So there are two publications that Amanda just threaded into the chat around bail reform. I think they would be, they'd probably capture a piece of your question. The other one I'm going to thread in right now is directly from the Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice. And this is what they call their scorecard. And so this will give you kind of a historical view of the progress that has been made as it relates to the supervised release program. And trend-wise, there's a couple of things that we've noticed. I think since 2016, we've noticed that folks under community supervision or working under supervised release are coming to court with the same frequency that those that are released on their own recognizance. This is huge because that is what bail is designed to do, is to make sure that you come back to court. So that's one big trend. The new legislation, though, as you'll see from those two documents, does allow judges to have more discretion. In the past, they could not, mandate services, for example. They can do that now. In the past, they could not increase someone's frequency of touch points with us. They can also do that now. And so those are still things that we are trying to see what they hold for us. One thing to remember is that, some of you may know this, the pandemic obviously begins in New York City in a way in March that closes our courts in the middle of March. Raymond's is closed from March 2020 until the middle of July 2020. And so really it's been since the middle of July that we've been getting a sample size of what this will look like, but we've been getting that reality via the pandemic. And so all of it has been done virtually. So we actually don't have a lot of data that tells us what the trends are in bail reform because of that gap and because of the reality of the pandemic. So we're starting to crunch those numbers now and take a look at the types of charges that we're seeing. If there's been an increase in violent felony offenses referred our way, for example, obviously there's an increase, we weren't seeing them before, but what are those charges within the violent felony offense category? How often are judges mandating a higher level of supervision for someone or mandating a service? So those are the things that we're looking at right now, but we are resting on the fact that, since 2016, we know with confidence that folks are returning to court. And so what we're trying to do is build from that and take into account the new iterations of the program. So I think the documents we've threaded, Caroline, may be helpful as you kind of dig through them to answer some of those questions for you too.
Caroline, go ahead if you have a follow-up.
Yeah, like what would you kind of say to opponents of bail reform? Because there are some, and that's why we faced cuts to it in this April's budget for 2021.
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on what that opponent of bail reform is pointing to and the data point. Look, we also have some very encouraging numbers pre-2020. Again, we haven't run the 2020 numbers yet around the impact to public safety. It was small. It was actually smaller, if I'm remembering, and you'll see this in the scorecard, than the ROR population, than those that were released on their own recognizance. So I think it's important to try to note what the kind of pushback is around bail reform in order to answer that question. But the one thing that I can say is that what we've pioneered here in New York City is incredibly innovative. It is a different approach. It is a community-driven approach where we aren't necessarily working with law enforcement in the traditional way. And to be clear, the sheriff's office can still order electronic monitoring with a judge. That can still happen. Those tools are still there. But I think what we've shown is that, the community model of working with folks in their community through social workers, case managers, and mental health counselors can be just as effective to getting folks to return to court with minimal impacts to public safety. So I think that's the best answer I can give without knowing the specific kind of pushback that folks may have. Amanda, I think you had something too.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to add one more layer to that, which is, this a tough on crime kind of perspective, which I think was the dominant approach to justice issues and public safety for many, many years. And some people still adhere to that approach and take issue with bail reform because they see it as releasing too many people. What is sometimes overlooked is that there's actually a good amount of evidence out there that has told us that incarcerating people, detaining them pre-trial or incarcerating them after the fact, actually increases the likelihood that they're going to commit further crimes and recidivate. And so it actually undermines public safety to incarcerate more people. And that is largely because, you know, what jail does is essentially disrupt the good things that are going on in people's lives, right? So it disrupts family ties, work lives, access to housing, services that they might need, and then the trauma that we know is a very real impact, you know, of being incarcerated. And so I think sometimes that is overlooked. That is touched on in the handouts that we just put in the chat. And I think it's an important one to highlight for people who don't realize, like, oh, jail actually breeds more crime rather than preventing it. We didn't know that, you know, 2 decades ago.
Which of your reports goes into that?
The one on bail reform. So there's 2 links I put in about bail reform. One is like bail reform and public safety. And it does, it touches on like some studies that have been done in other cities, and also just the fact, some of the social science research around, you know, the jail incarceration being known as what's called criminogenic, like actually, you know, producing crime and worse results.
Criminogenics? That's a new word.
Criminogenic, yes.
Wow.
Yes, contributing to further crime.
And is it particularly the incarceration, pre-trial incarceration or post-trial incarceration that
Both.
Okay.
Both. And I also, you know, the other thing I'll note is that, you know, it's when people are, you know, hypothesizing about whether the spike is related, you know, the spike in crime is related, you know, to the changes in the bail laws, but it's going to take some time for like a truly robust research project, you know, to actually be able to definitively say, was there a correlation? Like we don't think that there was, but really in order to make a determination like that, you need, you know, access to a lot of data over a longer period of time. And then you of course have COVID thrown in the mix, which is, you know, if there was any one factor that probably contributed to the increase in crime, you know, it's related to the pandemic, I think.
And that, Amanda, is the second document you shared. It's the one that says New York State 1 year on the link. And that one will talk a little bit about, you know, the language in here you'll see is that we have some public officials making some unsupported claims that link bail reform to a spike in gun violence. And so we don't necessarily see that correlation just yet. I mean, we need more time to see that data, but 1 year post the bail legislation, you know, we are not seeing that bail reform is linked to that increase. And I think, you know, for Amanda and I who do this criminal justice work day in and day out, you know, you're asking the tough question, what is the driver of the spike in crime? And I think oftentimes, at least from my perspective, it's very difficult to answer. You know, it can be economic based, it can be community based. COVID reality has never been something that we've dealt with. And so that is really the $1 million question often for us to try to answer, because if we can get to some of the root causes. But I think this report may give some insight, Sid, into how bail reform is or is not playing into the spike of crime.
Thank you.
Any other questions from community board members?
Yeah, I have a question. Just going off of what Carolyn was saying before. I've read recently that the number of New Yorkers in city jails, in state jails, has risen considerably in the last several months, and rising essentially since you know, the early months of the pandemic. And I'm curious if, commensurate with that, there have been fewer people being served by the Center for Point Innovation.
I'm sorry, Brian, I missed the very last part. Fewer people being served by who?
If people that are served, if there are fewer people being served by the programs that you run at the Center for Point.
That's a really good question. We definitely saw a dip in the amount of folks that we were able to provide services to in 2020. One obvious reason is that arraignments was closed, and so we weren't able to provide services. The courthouse was also closed, and a lot of cases were administratively adjourned out for many months, and so it was difficult. I can give you the number, actually. About 6,000 people received services from Brooklyn Justice Initiatives in 2019. Only about 3,800 received services in 2020. And since our launch, that number has actually progressively been going up. We're seeing projections a little bit higher than last year right now in 2021. But I do think some of that increase can be tied to the slowdown in courts. We do know that maybe folks, the administrative adjournment dates may have impacted folks. The closure of arraignments may have also impacted folks as well. I think, Amanda, we also put out a publication on that, if I'm not mistaken, which I'll try to dig up. If I don't get it on this call, I'll definitely circulate it to Juliet. But we did have we did put something out on this as well to just to at least talk about that increase, because we've noticed the increase in the jails as well.
And I can just add, Brian, that from the court-based service perspective, the people who are coming us through court in Red Hook, we also saw a similar decline for similar reasons. But on the flip side, in our community-based programs, we're serving just as many, if not more, people who are coming to us, seeking services. For example, we run a victim assistance program that focuses a great deal on providing support to survivors of domestic violence. And we know that during the pandemic, there was both locally and nationally an increase in family violence, intimate partner violence. And so we were seeing an uptick in referrals and clients coming in seeking those kinds of services, and also young people who are looking to engage in our programming to get some money in their pockets, or to just get them off of Zoom and do something in person. And so there's been certainly a notable decline in the court context, but not necessarily in other programming.
Brian, I just threaded in the report. I was able to find it. There's a brief description of it. It'll talk a little bit about, there has been a steep rise in those that are just awaiting trial. And again, the slowdown in the courts had an impact, but there are also some promising signs. There was a sharp drop in admissions for people sentenced to jail and people held on technical parole violations. So I think that report will give you a little bit more insight.
Thank you both.
Any other community members, community board members? Okay, now opening up to board members, if Ms. Blount has any questions. Okay, and then the general community. Okay, while people are thinking, I would like to ask, as you know, our statement of district needs includes a support for the creation of a community court, serving community District 2. We had developed our previous statement of district needs as we were learning about all of these new initiatives that were alternatives to incarceration. Right after this, your presentation, we're going to start talking about next year's statement of district needs. Given that you have described all of these alternative justice mechanisms that are within the court system and not necessarily in a community court system, Jonathan, with your program, what do you think, what would you recommend that we prioritize in terms of our thoughts on the justice system for our statement of district needs?
That's a really good question, Amanda. I saw you unmuted. I want to be mindful and respectful that, all of you obviously understand your district a lot better than we will ever understand it. From our perspective at Brooklyn Justice Initiatives, we serve the entire borough. And that can be difficult for us to establish a defined community. This is a very large borough. My personal opinion on this, and my opinion just as a person that has been working in this field, is I see promising investments in community really paying out on the preventative and proactive side of things. And so from my perspective, the more that we can invest in community and youth in a proactive way and a preventative way, that'll always be a win. We know in our districts, in our jurisdictions, in our boroughs, where we've had traditional high crime areas. What areas have been over policed? What areas have particularly been impacted by the mass incarceration issue? And so from my perspective, investing in those neighborhoods, investing in those districts, and making sure that we're also having a very blunt conversation about this reality, that some folks are over policed, that some folks may be in particular impacted disproportionately by the justice system. And we know that our Black and brown communities are disproportionately impacted by the justice system. And so I think it's a parallel process, in my opinion, of that acknowledgement and that investment in community in a proactive and preventative way. I don't know if you have thoughts, Amanda.
Well, I was going to say the same thing about prevention. And I think that, you know, John mentioned earlier, you know, some of the work we're doing is really reactive and responsive. Some of it is more preventative. I think the earlier that we can be investing in preventing these, you know, conflicts or issues from arriving at the doorstep of the justice system, you know, the better off we all are. And I think a lot of times for young people, that really just comes down to like establishing positive social networks, and not just young people, really anyone, right? Making people feel they are part of something, they're part of a community. The truth is, when people are joining gangs, you know, that is part of what they are looking for. They are looking for that sense of community, of belonging, of having one another's backs. And so like, how do we create that in a positive way? And then also just focusing in on some of, you know, what people sometimes term the hot spots, right? Mental health treatment, I see your comment said, yes, absolutely. Mental health, we do that. We do counseling and mental health treatment at the Justice Center. We offer that on a walk-in basis. And time again, we hear that if we try to refer someone out to long-term services in a different community, we're always hearing about wait lists, or, you know, there are insurance issues. People just need to be able to walk in and talk to someone. And I think, you know, and not have to worry about whether their insurance is active in that moment, and not have to worry about whether they can afford the copay or whether there's a wait list. But the other thing I wanted to mention is thinking about like physical space. We have another sister project called the Brownsville Community Justice Center. You may have heard of them. And they do not have a court, but what they do is they focus heavily on investing in young people in Brownsville and offering opportunities, but also investing in the activation of public space where there are the most shootings. What are the hotspots? What are the areas where people feel the least safe, and pouring in resources there and activating it in a way that, instead of it being a place where everybody is too scared to go, where everybody is coming together for something positive. So to the extent that you can, you know, try to really zone in on what are the areas in your district that are driving a lot of the crime. I'm looking, Caroline, at your comment in the chat. Yeah, I mean, it's a very complicated issue with access to health and mental health services, for sure.
Jonathan, does your program have that sort of like walk-in community feature with mental health or other services?
So it's something that we're trying to build out. We just secured our community spaces recently, and we've been mostly a court-based program. I will be honest with everyone here. Folks were not walking off of the street to find voluntary services in a courthouse. And so we actually opened our community spaces right as the pandemic was starting, particularly our large one on 14 DeKalb. So we're actually in the process to secure funding and advocating and fundraising for more community-based programs in order to be able to meet folks' needs outside of the court system. So at the moment, no, we'll never turn our back though on someone that walks in through our doors. It's just not something we're advertising since it's unfunded at this time. So
to be explicit, the statement of district needs is like our funding priorities. So if you have the name of the program you would like us to put on the list, that's what I'm asking you to let us know.
Fair, that's fair. I think we can follow up with that.
Okay. All right, sounds good. Thanks. And with that, is there, Carol Ann, do you have any follow-up questions or comments?
No, I don't, but I really enjoyed the presentation. I copied the links and I'll be sending them to anyone who wasn't able to grab them in the chat. I think this is like really great information for us. So from my side, I want to thank the presenters for being here this evening.
Thank you for having us.
And thank you for the work that you do in the community that serves all of Brooklyn. So thanks. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you.
sharing that with us.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye.
So great. This is a perfect segue into our conversation about the statement of district needs, which is the next agenda item, I believe. Yes. Carol Ann sent a link to a spreadsheet, and then I also have the previous statement of district needs. I don't know if Carol Ann, you sent that to everybody. Which would you like to go through, Carol Ann, since you sent the spreadsheet? Should we look at it in that format, or should we review what we have had previously?
Sometimes I think it's a good idea to think about where we are now, because I feel sometimes when we look back first, we let that influence what we want to put rather than what the current condition is.
That's quite
Am I
fair.
making sense?
Sure, for sure. So let's have an open, unscripted conversation that's not just repeating last year's conversation. And if people want to brainstorm ideas, we can just start writing them down, and then we can look at how we incorporate that into last year's. Go for it, Sid.
I'm a firm believer that the mental health treatment people are getting now is wholly inadequate. I mean, in the subways, half the problems are caused by mentally people who have been released prematurely, or there's frankly no place for them to go. And while I'm not a strong believer in building jails, because I really think we have enough of those, I really do think we need to build more mental health treatment that's not necessarily police based. I know that at times the police have to be involved, especially if someone's going to be involuntarily hospitalized. But we need more, better, quicker, more of available mental health treatment. And I'm not sure how to do that, other than that I can state the need, but I have no idea really how to go about doing it.
That's great to know. Thanks, Sid. And the HES committee, I think this would be perfect for a conversation with them too. I liked your idea, like specifically noting that non-police based responsiveness is good. And I really like the idea of a walk-in, mental health services where you don't have to show insurance, you don't have to show IDs, you can just go walk in and get services and treatment. I think that's also very helpful.
Juliet, part of the problem we have discovered, we have this overall increase in homelessness. And a lot of these folk are in the transit system because they actually have nowhere to go.
Yeah, good point too.
That is a problem that extends, and Community Board 2 deals with a lot of this. Just as an overall vision, when we upzoned downtown Brooklyn in 2004, we made no accommodation for the folks that were going to be gentrified out of the community. Here we are 18 or 20 years later. We are still not accommodating that group of people. As small as it is, they are impactful. So if we don't have a plan that deals with that level, we can talk as much as we want about all the fabulousness that we like, and that group of people is just not being addressed at all in a meaningful way.
Good point, Swan. Good tie to the mental health too. Yeah. Caroline.
Yeah, exactly what kind of John and Sid were saying reminded me of the joint meeting we had with HES about CAMBA and the Department of Homeless Services, and it does sound like some kind of capacity for walk-in mental health clinic with ability to, on the spot, get someone a place to stay that night for all ages is really necessary. Although in the district, I mostly see people over 25.
I can also add that we hear that there are some single room occupancy type of institutions that actually ask their residents to leave at 8 o'clock in the morning and not come back before 6 or 8 o'clock or whatever the specific period of time is. And so these folk are forced out on the street because these houses don't want them there all day. So the problem just continues to compound on itself. You hear all of the issues that feed into it without having an opportunity to talk about what kinds of solutions we can come up with to begin to address this problem.
Thank you, John. I would definitely put on our list the gun violence and gang violence that has increased in our district over the past year. Understanding its causes, our previous presenters were saying, we don't have the data yet to really make the links to understand what is causing that increase in violence. But, I think understanding the root causes will help us to address them. And then as our presenters were suggesting, supporting those preventative and proactive services that could stem some of the criminal activity that has increased in our neighborhood.
So Juliet, we're going back to the report on where we are. What are we looking to do next?
We're brainstorming for the statement of district needs without going back and looking yet. So we're just talking about what district needs, and doesn't, you can brainstorm. Right now we've been talking about public safety. We can complete that conversation and then we can move on to the transportation portion as well.
Well, I want to give an update on York Street. There's been a lot of activity around York Street. And this is the importance of committees sharing with each other. At the Land Use Committee, we rejected the air rights sale for 69 Adams Street. Because of that rejection, and it was rejected because the York Street station is not ADA compliant. I should say that up front. And 69 Adams is close to J Street, and the air rights would have been used to create more commercial activity in an area of our district where there's no ADA access to the subway station. So as a result of that denial, it got the attention of a whole host of folks. The $18 million that was the result to the city from the sale of those air rights, a good portion of it will come back to Community District 2. And a portion of that portion is going to be assigned for investigation of ADA compliance in the York Street train station. So that's on our list from a transportation perspective, and we can put an asterisk next to currently it is going to be beginning ADA compliance study.
That is funny because Mr. Inglesby said that they were already studying ADA compliance on the York Street station and that he would be coming back to us within the near future on that. So that may have been a little bit of city like, oh, we're gonna allocate some of that money when it was already, allocated.
No, I don't think it was allocated. It has not been on any of their reports. And we've been asking this for this since 2004, Juliet.
No,
been
the
getting
money's
this-
not, right, the allocated, I meant for the study, not for the actual rebuilding. So I think that, you know, that is great news that some of those monies will be allocated for the actual rebuilding.
No, we're not at the rebuilding yet. We're still at the study. The money
They're
for the
already
study.
studying it.
No, they're not. They weren't.
Eh.
I wish I could say they would. I want them to have started studying it. They will not give you the name of the company that they've hired to go in and start and begin to do the study on whether that station can even be made ADA compliant because of all the build-arounds that are going to be required. There's a limited category of space that could make that station ADA compliant. They're even talking about whether it's got to be a new station. They haven't decided that. There's
Right.
no plan yet.
And to be fair, and Andy Inglesby did say that he would not commit that the additional entrance that they were looking at to the York Street station would be an elevator. He did indicate that it could be stairs. So, you know, they're studying an additional entrance into York Street station. He did not say whether it would be ADA or not. So at this
And-
point,
and-
it sounds like that has evolved to be primarily
Okay,
on the ADA.
well, I'm talking ADA compliance, and stairs would not meet that requirement.
Understood. It could have, what I was saying is that it is not clear, he did not indicate, he did not give us any clue yet, but he said he would be back within the coming months and that they were studying it.
Sid, please make note of that.
And Carol Ann's on top of it.
Yes, she is. Carolyn Taylor on top of everything.
Yes.
I'm aware too.
Are there other brainstorming ideas that we should incorporate into our statement of district needs? How about open streets? How do people feel about open streets?
Well, I don't know how we would call that a district need. I'm just going to bring this up because this is an ongoing problem that we're having. I'm going to say in the city, but clearly in community district 2, is that we were not consulted at all about this open streets program. And while it sounds very nice on the surface, it does come with some issues that the Department of Transportation has not developed a policy to deal with. One of the concerns that we've heard is that because of some of these bulb outs, the cars, folks are encouraged to go and stand on the bulb out before they get crossed, and the cars making sharper turns than the bulb out would permit are hitting pedestrians. We have to study that and understand if there has to be some other mechanism employed in order to reduce the potential that cars are now going to inadvertently hit pedestrians because they have a greater way of getting in the way of a car, and the car has less opportunity to turn than it did before. So this is just part of the whole issue of we're a community board. We are the closest to the folks that the city is responsible for. They need to react with the community board before they implement citywide measures. They have a whole group of 50 times 51 people that work for free. They should be taking more advantage of the fact that we are a built-in mechanism that is the closest to the folk that they are responsible for.
Absolutely. And, you know, all of the agencies should take that lead. You know, we had some recently at our last committee meeting that that came to us after things were already in motion. You know, back to open streets, I think Carol Ann sort of laid it out appropriately in the spreadsheet. You know, you can feel free to share it if you would like, Carol Ann, but I think the clarity of clarifying the program, and then also funding it so that it's not reliant on taxed neighborhood volunteers would be critical to its success.
Also, a point of clarification about this spreadsheet, it says Dumbo parentheses universal. I mean, it does sound like the Dumbo bid wants resources to be able to do more, but I don't see that as being the ones for the majority of people who live in Community District 2, or being the ones that would be the most under-resourced. So like maybe that's intentional. Maybe we do want, you know, visitors to Dumbo to feel safe on the open streets. But if that's not the case, I would, you know, push for this to be everywhere. And it's nice that there's a bid collaborator, but I mean, it could just be supporting those community groups in Fort Greene and Clinton Hill who are doing it on their residential streets.
Hey, Caroline, I can help clarify that a little bit. We were given feedback that all requests are made stronger by listing a partner organization. So making that request specific to Dumbo doesn't mean that it couldn't be requested for other bid catchment areas. It just strengthens the request for that particular area.
Okay, thanks, Ty.
Yeah.
Additional comments or suggestions?
So I don't know if anyone had time to review the open street text amendment, but the city is going to be making changes to how that's going to operate. And I'm sorry, I can't really pull out, you know, some facts on that right now, but we might be served to review it before making a suggestion that may or may not be included.
I can offer a tip on that as well from your colleagues in the ED&E committee. When the bids came and spoke to that committee, several of them reported that in their own conversations with DOT, they were advised not to spend too much money on their setups because things would be changing by the end of the year. So that was just a note to be mindful that these are requests for fiscal year 23.
And remind us of the process, of the calendar year process for these, please.
So the ongoing cycle is such that we are currently at the end. Submission is going to go in end of October. Then
if you wanted to project to share screen again, the schedule as we know it is outlined on the first tab of the spreadsheet.
Yeah, I was just going off memory, but yeah, I should share it. Thank you.
So when would our committee need to have its recommendations for the big schedule that gets voted on by the board?
That's best in September, because the document has to get submitted on by October 31st. And so the board will need to vote on it in October at its October general meeting. We'd like to do a public hearing this year and do some outreach so that we can have the public participate. Last year, 2 persons and Mr. Du showed up. So while we did appreciate Mr. Du, we really would like to get the public involved in reviewing these. And maybe Tia and I would brainstorm to see if there's something we can do over the summer to get people excited. Maybe, you know, create a little hype around it in the same way as participatory budgeting gets promoted. So that's in October, it gets submitted. And we hear back from department around January. They present their responses, and then we start the cycle all over again come April, May.
Okay, thank you, Carol Ann. So, given that there's going to be another committee brainstorming next month, and then the actual document wouldn't get finalized until September, I think that, unless there are other brainstorming ideas to add to the list at this time, we can move on with the agenda.
Can I suggest something, Juliet? I don't know where you're going to put this in the agenda, but under transportation, the crash sites, we can look at the mapping data and see if there are any locations in the district that we would like DOT to pay attention to that might require a capital project.
That would be great. Would you like to pull that up and share the screen?
Sure, I can do that. When the banner is up on the screen, it's difficult to find. Okay. Is everyone seeing it?
Yes, thanks.
I have a map.
Okay, that's where we're going to start with the map. From what time do we want to start? Do we want to start from last July?
Sure, let's do a year. So last May.
And that the big circle is Flatbush and Tillery. That Flatbush and Atlantic.
Myrtle.
So yeah, we can
Area
choose.
in the district by far.
So the red is a fatality?
And multiple accidents.
Yeah, and it has had other fatalities in the past too.
Right, that's Flatbush and Atlantic, which we know is terrible.
Actually, that one is Myrtle and Flatbush. Yeah.
That's Myrtle.
And actually, that's why I joined the committee 7 years ago.
Yes, I remember.
And we know that none of these are accidents. They're all pretty intentional crashes. We know that the design of spaces has created.
They're incidents.
Create crash incidents. How about that?
They're incidents.
Let me see. Is this Flatbush and Atlantic?
That would be DeKalb. Can you zoom in a little bit more?
So we can see we have a number of hotspots.
I think that's
throughout.
perfect, Carolyn, to like identify those hotspots. Yes, over like by Pier 6. Yep, over there.
Yeah.
That's huge.
18 crashes.
Yeah, that's huge.
Well, that's a lot of those. Some of those are on the highway.
I don't think so. I think those are.
Would that make it better?
No, it makes it worse.
I mean, I don't think people should be, up on the highway.
Well,
they're not pedestrians. That is a particularly bad place that the city and the state just refuse to fix.
True. It's a very difficult entry.
Right. Actually, there's a simple way of fixing it, but they won't do it.
well, better signage and controls.
Excuse me?
Better signage and controls.
No, they'll have to close one of the lanes off so that they get the conflicts down. The way of
merge on, yes,
the conflicts down. And signage doesn't help it.
Yeah, I think that intersection has two issues. One is at the pedestrian level, and then one is up at the BQE level.
Yeah.
We should probably frame that discussion that way.
See, it says question: cyclists injured, motor, and it says, and then if you can't where it goes motor, I can't see where it says motorist injured, but that's the big number.
Well, let me see. It doesn't.
Yeah, but it's because it's on the highway. This is just a bad entrance. I actually tried to get it fixed, and they just won't do anything about it.
So that's good. We'll put that on our list.
And actually, Carol Ann, if you scroll on the side, on the left side of the black box that's open, you might be able
The
to
right side of the black box.
stage right.
See, pedestrians killed, pedestrians injured is none. It's all motorists. It's motorists. It's 28 motorists. It's all on the highway. As I said,
I think that's definitely worth adding to the district needs.
and there've been a number of fatalities either right there or a little bit further down.
But if we look right next to it, maybe where the pedestrians are walking, those are different numbers.
Yeah, there are 3 circles. So
yeah, so
the
here
big
is,
one, as Sid mentioned, is the BQE. So can we look at some other intersections?
You want to go Hillary? This one is Tillery and Flatbush Extension.
Okay.
5 crashes.
What other ones? Other
9 injured.
Okay.
Right here.
That one is
What's
14.
going on Furman Street?
Sorry. BQE again.
That's another
29 injuries.
Yep.
Furman John. 9 crashes, 21 injured again.
Those are all vehicular.
That may be a reporting issue. They may get more reporting on.
Along the highway.
Yeah.
2 pedestrians injured here. This is Tillery and Flushing. 2 cyclists, 2 pedestrians.
Yep.
Well, they're building a separate aren't they building a separate bike lane there?
There were a lot of members in the community who opposed that bike lane because of
Parking.
Yeah. But I think the DOT's plan was to move forward, but it hasn't. So I don't know if they're if that's pending that support.
Yeah. And Flatbush Extension and Johnson, 4 crashes, 4 injured. And we did that one. I didn't expect Myrtle Avenue here to have 4 crashes, 3 injured.
Yeah, it's almost a mid-block crossing, so the cars get used.
This is Fulton. 4 crashes, 4 injured.
Can we check that?
This is a funny little space here.
Can we check that? Yeah, that circle at Flatbush. Yeah.
7 injured.
Well, it's good. The crashes are relatively low. Could you dig into the injuries to understand whether they're pedestrian or not?
Motorists. Look here. Sorry. Yeah. That's what happens when you don't use a mouse.
If the goal is to just look at pedestrians, it might be helpful to use that filter tool on the side and make everything else light, and then pedestrian should be.
Yeah, why don't we try that to see if we can focus on pedestrians? It's not the goal, but it would be illustrative. So you would leave the pedestrians and remove the others.
Yeah, the no injury. Think off the no injury.
Oh, I thought Okay. I thought I've selected pedestrian fatality and pedestrian injury.
I
So
think they're
let's see.
unselected.
Yeah, I think that's it.
Yeah, I think selected is when it's darker yellow.
Okay. Maybe. Should I leave cyclists in as well?
Sure.
Yeah, leave cyclists in. Or pedestrians. I want to see pedestrians and cyclists.
So here, okay. We have,
That's Atlantic and
Right.
Fourth.
yeah,
It was last November. Yeah, that fatality.
3 crashes, 2 injured, 1 killed. 1.
So Carol Ann, when they are documenting these accidents and crashes and the like with the pedestrians, is there reports that indicate who's at fault?
Yeah, but they're totally unreliable. They're absolutely totally unreliable. They're probably almost next to useless because the cops always put down the pedestrians. Not always, but the cops almost always put down the pedestrians at fault. And then when they study them, that they turn out not to be the way.
We had talked years ago, I don't know whether the committee remembers this, that we were going to experiment with the crossing countdown clocks that actually gave you the number of seconds you had to cross, to see whether folks who are trying to cross when it says don't walk will look up and see that I have 10 seconds, I have a cane, maybe I should not try to cross.
Sorry, I'll turn my sound off. I shouldn't laugh at that.
Sid, a good laugh always helps to reduce the blood pressure. And we had actually chosen the corner of Tillery and Fulton Street to get that countdown clock with the seconds.
So that exists on Flatbush and Myrtle. I know that.
And also at Tillery and off the Borum, it also exists. But yeah, but that doesn't. I don't think that really helps very much.
Well, if it's in those corners or at those particular corners, it's because statistics indicated that that would have been a good corner to try it out for.
Well,
so let's see, is it been a reduction
there with the pedestrian crossing against the red light?
Well, that's all you get. That you can't stop.
Sure you can if you separate. Oh, never mind. You don't look at me.
So Carolyn, do you need us to actually like vote on intersections, or can you use this data to document it and then have it in the spreadsheet?
I think B, we just document the high crash locations and ask for interventions. I think I should also ask DOT 2 things. Where are the locations? If they can send us a map of the locations with the countdown clocks, and maybe as well the accessible signals, the ones for hearing impaired. I'm thinking. And then 2, a question, something that either John or Sid just raised. Have countdown clocks improve safety at those intersections?
Yes.
And advanced green does too. And they've put advanced green into a lot of the corners.
At advanced green.
Yeah, LPI/advanced green to add to the list. Thanks, Carol Ann.
Give the pedestrians a chance.
Yes, like me. Ever tried crossing Atlantic Avenue at most intersections as a pedestrian?
Well, they have advanced screen. They have advanced screen on most of the corners on Atlantic Avenue.
Julian's baby wants to be at the meeting.
Yes, he's not quite so baby anymore. He's very teenager now.
But they do have advanced screen at almost, not all, but almost all the corners on Atlantic Avenue have advanced screen.
Okay, that's good to know.
Okay, thank you, Carolyn, for
Okay.
sharing this. This is great.
Carolyn,
Sir?
is there a way for DOT to notify the community board whenever they're making any kind of change, improvement, or whatever? Is that something that happens automatically from DOT?
You know, I can't really say if it happens automatically. They tell us when they tell us. I really don't have a response for that from inside DOT.
Can we add that to the list to see if they can develop a mechanism that when they send somebody out and the project is completed and that person has to get paid or noticed or whatever, that the community board is notified that that particular project is completed by DOT?
We can. I'm not sure if that qualifies as a district need budget item, though.
No, it's not.
No, I wasn't mentioning it as a district need.
Okay.
Because I'm listening to Sid talk about all of these corners on Atlantic Avenue, which I did not know. That all of those corners had those countdown crossing signs.
Almost all, not all. There are a couple, there are a few, but most. I know that Nevins, Bond, Hoyt and Bond, they all do. And I know that they have, they have whatever they have. They keeps rejiggering Bourne Place and Atlantic.
By the way, you mentioned Nevin Street. That has been a problem for years because there is no signal to turn onto Nevin Street.
Yeah, there is.
No.
There is.
Nevin from,
There is. From Flatbush, there is.
yes.
Oh, Flatbush, there's
Oh,
not
okay.
on Atlantic.
No.
I'm talking about, we were talking about Atlantic.
Oh, no, she mentioned Nevin, so I jumped to Nevin's.
Yeah, but I was thinking about Nevins and Atlantic.
No, Nevins and
Flatbush.
Yes.
Yeah, that's definitely going to be a point worth studying because they built that huge residential tower on both sides of it. Yeah,
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, it had been closed for a while, but it's back up now.
Okay, if we're good on the statement of district needs, I'm happy to move on to the review of the ComStat reports is in the chair's portion of the meeting, which Caroline already has up.
Yes, it's.
Okay, so for the 84th, it's depicting what we already know, increases in robberies, grand larcenies, overall increases in 2021 versus 2020. Interesting transit is down.
Right.
Maybe unreported, I don't know. Okay.
Maybe just our district.
Right. So looking at the 88th, burglaries are down, interestingly. But everything else is up.
Up in the 8-4.
Yes, yep. And 2 shootings too.
There were burglaries in the Clinton Hill area. They were a little bit up earlier in the year, but guess it's leveled off.
Yeah, we've had a couple on Myrtle Avenue. Specifically, a couple of the businesses have been burglarized after hours.
Juliet, can I say something?
Yes, please, Ms.
It's
Bond.
Esther. I went to the 88th precinct council meeting, and they asked the community to, since we have such a you know, by LIU, DeKalb, and where the homeless people hang out. Why can't I think of the other? Flatbush and DeKalb.
Right.
Flatbush and DeKalb,
Right.
under Applebee's and
Right,
LIU.
on the Applebee's and LIU. You know, it's like an encampment there with homeless people. And they ask that, you know, that we do not, to tell people in the community, do not give them money, blankets, or anything. They're not trying to be cruel, but Breaking Ground is trying to help these individuals, some other organizations. And if we don't help them, maybe they would accept some help from, like Breaking Ground has so many supportive services. So maybe they would accept that instead of, you know, us handing out stuff. I know it's hard, especially in the winter. Somebody might want to give somebody a coat or a blanket, but they have asked us not to do that. So I just want to say that.
I'll put that up on the Bourne Hill news group too.
Is there anything else you wanted to report from the 88th Precinct Council meeting?
No, it was a big crowd this time, but no, they just trying to work. It was a lot of youth there in the Explorer team, and I can't, why, for some reason I can't think of anything else.
Okay, thank you for sharing. And Cheryl, I don't think that you made it. If you're on, can you let us know? Okay, all right, so we won't
Wasn't
talk.
able to log in. We tried.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So I'll move on to other business. If anybody has any other business.
I did want to bring up, when are we going to hear an update on the BQE?
Well, they announced that they're going to be making an announcement. And we asked the commissioner's office about that, I believe, and they said they don't know.
And add to Sid's comment that they have said that tentatively September, they'll be ready to come to the board.
Okay, Carol Ann, come to the board. Do we have a sense of, are they coming to the board with a plan? Because you know, we had this whole big study done a couple of years ago that was supposed to yield some kind of result. And it yielded a referral back to, you know, we had all these architects come in and devise all these plans. It just goes all the way back 20 years. Sid, you will remember when we had our first meetings about the BQE. There's no other roadway in the world that's like this BQE. So there isn't anything for them to base doing this kind of project in such a highly populated area. There's nothing for them to work with. So I guess my question is, did they give you a hint that they actually are coming with something that is a viable plan?
You know, they gave us no hints. We've just been asking them for a while, when will they come on this topic? And that was the response. And
okay,
I followed up when the announcement was made that an announcement would be made, and they said we still have nothing to share.
Hmm.
We asked them to come and make the announcement at our, you know, at CB2, but we'll, you know,
Yeah.
Have we any update on what they finally decided for the Brooklyn Bridge bike path, since they're working on it feverishly? They're putting up fencing for the people so they can put the Jersey barriers.
No, they have not contacted us since the last meeting.
I would hope that they do not plan on redirecting all of the BQE traffic through the Fort Greene Public Housing Project's Sand Street entrance to the bridge.
Well, I don't. They were saying it would be going down J Street to the Sand Street. I don't know about down by the houses. the way they showed it, it would go, they would make the left turn from Flatbush onto Tillery, and then a right at J Street.
The traffic exiting the BQE down Cadman Plaza, turning to Tillery, and then going down Tillery, entering the Brooklyn Bridge, that traffic was supposed to be directed down Tillery to make that turn to go into the Sand Street exit.
Right, but it goes,
Entrance, excuse me.
they turn, they make the left onto, maybe we're talking about different place. You're traveling north on Flatbush. There's a 2-lane.
I'm not talking about Flatbush. It has nothing to do with Flatbush.
The BQE traffic, Sid, going from the BQE towards the Brooklyn Bridge. The traffic was, they projected that the 650 cars or whatever would get redistributed through the neighborhood, most of them turning right on J Street. Maybe that's where they would put the sign of a detour. But then potentially some of them also being able to access that Sand Service Road if they missed the detour and they were not able to turn right on the Brooklyn Bridge.
I understand. So I'm just trying to figure out how it goes into the 4 green houses.
If you're going through Sand Street,
It's not Fort Greene, it's Farragut.
Farragut.
Farragut, yeah.
Farragut, but it's the Fort Greene Public Housing Projects. We call them Fort Greene collectively. But yes. Yes.
So Carolyn, if you could follow up to see if they had taken our recommendations, to heart to potentially address some of that traffic nightmare.
I will.
Thank you. And then EDC, you did follow up with them. Do you want to give us the update of their non-update?
So Ratty was on vacation, so I didn't follow up on the non-update because I know what it's like to come back and meet your box overflowing, but I will follow up with him.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah, essentially they told us that they were planning on queuing. They didn't say anything in the response.
It might be good to marry them with the Brooklyn Bridge Park folks, if that hasn't happened, to see how Brooklyn Bridge Park Development Corp, as they have these planners and architects on their staff, how do they feel about this, new imposition on the historic pier that used to be such a draw for tourists and traffic?
I believe they're working together, but I noted to make that connection.
And express our concerns to them too, please. Okay, if there's no other business, I'll go to community forum.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Hi, I'm Richard Morrow, and I was asking to speak. I'm the NYPD 8-4 Precincts Community Partner for Sector B. I'm not sure how many of you have heard of the NYPD Citizens Police Academy. It allows community members like ourselves to experience and participate in the training and drills our police officers go through. I'm a graduate of the academy. It was an amazing experience. The academy has been closed and it recently reopened. I'm here tonight to ask if there's anyone interested in participating in this 10-week program. You can contact Officer Julius Hudson. I'll put his information in the chat, with his email, or you can call me. I'll put my phone number in there for any further details and particulars. Registration for the next class, unfortunately, is this Friday, end of day. Excuse me for the last minute notice, but I was just told about it, and I knew that you were having a meeting, and this is my first time at this transportation meeting with a safety issue part of it. So I want to thank you, and I want to wish you all a great weekend and a safe one.
How many hours a week in the 10-week?
Oh, that's a great question. It's 3 hours, 3 hours a week. You meet at the 8-4. You're driven to the meeting. They wait for you. At the end of the meeting, you're driven back home, not to the 8-4. They take you right to your house. Like I said, it's everything you were discussing tonight, especially about the mental health issue. You go through that. I was actually the officer at that experience. I mean, I was pretending to be with a mentally disturbed person, EDPs they call them, and what the situations that exist now with the problem with the homeless people, and especially people with mental challenges. The first ones to respond are going to be the police. What we have to do is get their training better. We have to train them better. That's the issue. I went through just a brief training of all you go through all 10 weeks, psychological, holdups, you actually act it out. You get these fake electric guns to hold and play with. And then you get the psychological part of it. And you realize when you graduate at this great ceremony, it's an incredible ceremony, just like a policeman would graduate with, the same way. You get to appreciate the difficulty of the job, why there are so many suicides amongst these men and women, and the horror. If I were a young kid, 25, trained for what is it, 6 weeks? 6 weeks, 8 weeks max, and then you're thrown out on the street, I would be pretty scared and pretty dumbfounded. At any rate, it's a great opportunity. I'm a community partner. I know Inspector Mascol, if you know him, he's the inspector for Brooklyn North. He's really trying to pull us together. I was with the community partners from the 8-8. I mean, on this conference call, so I'm aware of things that are happening in our community, totally Brooklyn North. And even though I focus on the 8-4 Sector B, my heart goes out to Brooklyn. So thank you again for the opportunity to speak. And I hope to come to one or more of these meetings again. Thank you.
Thank you for the information. And I do hope we get participation in that.
Thank you.
And Mr. Gantz, did you want to contribute or say anything? Okay. Carolyn is reminding me to remind members to review the DOT New York City Street Plan and commercial zones. And also, I just wanted to mention, she had distributed the city bike locations and didn't receive any comments. So if you have any comments on that, you can send them to Carolyn, right? Okay, thank you. So with that, I think we're done with our agenda.
Juliet, I need to thank you and Cheryl for your many, many, many years of administering transportation and public safety. Specifically today, we spent a great amount of time on public safety. That experience of what's going on in Red Hook, if we can get a hold of it, can be extremely helpful to the community and specifically the Fort Greene public housing projects. So that gives me a way at least to begin talking about how we might be able to get in and help those folks. So that was a real benefit. Your skills in organization have been apparent from day one, and Community Board has benefited greatly from your expertise. So I want to thank you and Cheryl for your very successful reign as chairing public transportation and public safety for Community District 2.
Thank you,
Second the
John.
motion.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. I really appreciate it. And, as I mentioned last time, it's been such an experience to be with you guys and to work in this committee. And I look forward to staying on the committee as a public member with Sid as the chair of the committee. So thank you,
But
Sid.
only after you come back from Antigua.
Yeah.
Antigua.
Be gone next month. I'm gonna take a little break.
Enjoy.
Thank you. Thank you. So I'll see everybody in September if we don't have a committee meeting over the summer. So
Before you leave, Juliet, I also need to thank Carolyn and Taya because this is our first Zoom meeting. You are aware that I asked that we go on Zoom from the first Webex meeting. Carolyn and Taya will tell you that this is the first meeting where I could sign on with only one device. I always had to use two devices, one to talk and one for the visual. This is magnificent. I would only ask that we look to employ that countdown clock that exists on the Zoom feature so that we can bring a little bit better control to the length of time some folks speak, including myself.
Second that motion also.
thank you, Carol Ann. Thank you, Taya, for running everything smoothly, except for Cheryl, who was not able to make the Zoom somehow.
Neither was Doreen, by the way.
Oh, they might have been trying on their phones or something.
But if they want to, I'm more than happy to set up a Zoom so that we can take them offline so they can try it beforehand and see if it works next time. I have my Zoom account. I'll be happy to do that for you.
I second that motion. It's all approved. Sid, you got it.
Thank you, everybody. I assume that there's also motions to adjourn, right?
Yes.
There we go. Good night, everybody.
Night.
Good
Thanks,
night.
Julie.
Thank you.